Good evening, everybody. Welcome to JWA's Book Talks. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. Very glad to be back with everyone here tonight. Please say hello in the chat box. Um, Make sure to chat to everyone. We love to know who's with us in the room, so tell us your name and where you're coming in from. This is a fabulous community. We love to know who's with us. Also, the chat is where you can add questions throughout the program, and I will try to bring them into our conversation as we are talking. A few words about JWA for anyone who's new. We are a digital archive. Our work is about transforming the way we understand history and Jewish culture by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We also pay special attention to how gender functions in the past and present. And we do all of this work because we really believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story is how we are going to make the world a better place. So thank you for being our partners in this effort. The book talks are just one aspect of JWA's work, so I encourage you to check out jwa.org and learn more about the full range of projects and resources that we offer. I'm so delighted to introduce and really welcome back our featured author for this evening. Sarah Hurwitz is the author of As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Shame, Blame, and Try to Erase Us, which is a New York Times bestseller and won the Natan Notable Book Award. She's also the author of Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism after finally choosing to look there. You like the long titles.
I do. I often forget them because they're so long, so it's not the best strategy. But a friend of mine was like, "They're chatty, like
Yeah,
you."
exactly. Sarah served as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama, as chief speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama, and as chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton on her 2008 presidential campaign. Sarah is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School and has completed training to be a chaplain, which she does on a volunteer basis at a hospital near her home. Welcome, Sarah. So great to
Thank
have
you
you
so much.
back.
It's beautiful seeing all these names in different places in the chat. And I actually saw someone from my hometown, so just makes my night. It's really lovely to see this.
And I was saying this before everyone else got on that I did a little poking back in the history of the JWA's book talks, and you were actually our fifth book talk back in April of 2020, back when we still called it the Quarantine Book Club. And tonight is, I think, book talk 94. And of
Wow.
course, we have lots of other kinds of virtual programs, so we're doing these almost every week, but very exciting that we have you back at this point.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be back.
So one of the things that I really appreciate about your work is that you address these really huge topics, and the book that we're talking about tonight, this really is like a giant sweep of history that you managed to encompass, but you root it really clearly in your own story. And of course, at JWA, we are big believers in the power of storytelling, and you, as a speechwriter, clearly have a strong background in storytelling. So I thought maybe we could start by you telling us a little bit about how you came to write this book.
Yeah. So, it's funny. My first book had come out and I was just like having so much fun visiting communities and talking about it, but then COVID happened. And so everything got shut down and I was doing, the Zoom book talks, which somehow just were taking so much less time. And I decided, okay, I'm going to write another book. Now it's time. And I really tried to write a book about Jewish spirituality and I just couldn't. I was just struggling. So after months and months, I put it aside and I'd been really inspired by the amazing medical professionals who were heroically caring for patients during COVID. And I learned about chaplaincy and I was like, oh, I want to do that. So I trained to be a volunteer hospital chaplain. And even the word chaplain, right? Like my friends were like, oh, you're still Jewish, right? Like it is it's a Christian word. And, we would talk about our ministry and our theology. And I was kind of told like prayer is, God, please heal my friend Judith. She's right here in front of me. I'm praying spontaneously, like, which is so gorgeous as a way of prayer. And certainly Jews can pray that way, but we generally don't. But I was told, no, you pray for every patient that way. I thought like, God, I'm not sure about that, right? Like that's, I think I began to realize that so many things that I had grown up thinking were universal were actually Christian. And I'd sort of been soaked in this, we're a majority Christian country, of course, right? There's nothing nefarious. That's just the majority culture. And, I realized like, wow, I think about Judaism in Christian terms. I thought like spirituality is my body is, kind of like, carnal, a little gross, but like the spirit is good and you're supposed to transcend the body for a spiritual realm. But in Judaism, like our bodies are sacred. The Torah has so much thinking about how you treat your body. And so I thought like, I've been handed a bunch of Christian keys that I was told were universal keys, but actually they really just unlock one tradition. They weren't unlocking mine. And the second thing that happened is I visited a college campus in 2022, and the students kept asking me how I dealt with anti-Semitism when I was in college. I was at the Hillel, and I was so stunned because I was like, I didn't, I was in college in the 90s. Like, what? I was so shocked. And they looked like they didn't believe me. And I
Mm.
thought, like, something is happening here. And I think I began to really reflect on my Jewish identity for most of my life, which was a very apologetic, embarrassed Jewish identity of like, I'm Jewish, but not that Jewish. It was like one long word. Or, I'm not like those other Jews who are religious. Like, why did I say that? What was the problem with those other Jews? And I had all these qualifiers like, well, I'm just a cultural Jew, but I didn't know anything about Jewish culture, right? Like, I just meant I liked bagels, or I'm a social justice Jew, but I didn't actually know what Judaism said about social justice. And so, why was I excusing? Why was I caveating? Why was I so kind of ashamed? And this book was really my effort to dig into those questions, to try to understand the anti-Semitism I was seeing, the kind of like Christian dominance I was seeing, and my own kind of shame for most of my life.
You start by talking in the book by talking about emotions, shame being one of them, but also grief and anger and confusion and compassion. Can you talk a little bit more
Yeah.
about kind of what the role that those emotions played for you in this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of, I did a pretty deep dive into history, and I just discovered how extraordinary our ancestors were in persisting through brutal persecution for so many centuries, and how resilient and brave they were, and how, in Western Europe in the 1800s they were finally offered the opportunity to be citizens of nation states along with everyone else. But to take advantage of that opportunity, they had to really change how they were Jewish in order to kind of fit in and assimilate. And they kind of transformed Judaism from a 24/7 identity that was your peoplehood, your civilization, your nation. Like, it really, you weren't a Jew, you weren't like a German of the religion, of the Jewish religion. You were a Jew. But they kind of rethought of Judaism as a Protestant style religion, and they wound up kind of almost like jamming a Protestant cookie cutter into Judaism and getting rid of a lot of what didn't fit. And I think, as I was looking at this, like, one of the things that didn't fit were 2,500 years of post biblical text, which is where so much of Jewish tradition lies. Some of the rituals that I think are most deeply powerful in Judaism, like Shiva, like, that's not in the Torah, right? So many of these were things that our ancient rabbis came up with, and there's so much wisdom, there's so much beauty. And, because there wasn't a Christian parallel, the focus was really on the Old Testament, as it was called, because, that was like the respectable text. And I just felt such grief at what had been lost, like such grief. And it was very funny. I was talking to a group of Israelis about this, and one of them interrupted me and said, "Oh, that happened to us too." And I was like, "Sorry, I don't think so, but thank you." Like, and he kept interrupting me, and he's like, "No, no, no, listen, this happened to us too." And I realized, I was like, "Oh my God, he's right." Because if you look at, reading some of the early Zionist thinkers, they are just as dismissive of Jewish religion, right? This is superstitious nonsense. It's our rabbis. They're getting us killed. We're going to leave this behind to become secular Israelis. And so I thought, like, oh my God, this loss, this kind of removal of Judaism's beating heart, like, this happened to both of us, to both of our people. And we are, I think, still dealing with the ramifications today. I also just felt such compassion for our ancestors. Like, it would have been so easy for them to just say, forget this Judaism thing. I'm just a German. I'm just a Frenchman. We're done. Or I'm going to go be Christian. That's easier. But they wanted to stay Jewish. And I think that is so brave. And I feel such gratitude to them. And I just feel compassion for what they were dealing with. It really, I feel nothing but compassion and gratitude for our ancestors. I feel a lot of anger. Where the anger comes in is at those who made us do this, at those who insisted that we had to be like them in order to be okay. That I feel tremendous anger over.
And did your sort of emotional, was there a sort of emotional arc where you landed in a different place, or do you still sort of feel all of those emotions as a big mix still?
I still feel all of them, right? Like, I still feel all of them, and I don't know. Yeah, I do feel all of them, especially when I just think about like myself 12 years ago, where for me, like, Judaism was like two boring holidays, one like medium boring holiday, and then one really fun holiday. It was like the two holidays in the synagogue, the Seder, which was medium boring, and the Hanukkah party, which was fun.
Hmm.
And then it was like two texts, prayer book in hand, Torah thingy on scrolls, and a handful of like universalist values that we all agree on. And that was the Judaism. Why would there be anything else? Like, and that's not impressive to me, right? I'm going to walk away and I'm going to learn about, Western civilization, or, Western philosophy or Eastern religion, because those are sophisticated, right? Those are the good ones. But like, that's not true. That wasn't what Judaism was. Like, what I was presented was this kind of, it was a legacy of something else. And I don't know. I still feel a lot of feelings about that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you've sort of gestured towards this, I think, but one of the things that you write about is the insufficiency of these Western categories of
Yeah.
the Enlightenment to, and Protestant religion to capture Jewishness. We're not just a religion, we're not
Yes.
just an ethnicity, we're not a race. And you sort of prefer a term that comes actually from the Israeli writers Amos Oz and his daughter Fania Oz Salzberger, which is Judaism as a text line.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about what
Yeah.
that means to you?
So actually, my preferred term is actually Judaism as a family with a text line. So I think if you want me to define what we are down to our very essence, it's a family. You don't have to know anything about the text line. If you're a Jew, you're a Jew. I don't care what you know, don't know, you're a Jew. Um, and I think that, we are so stuck with these Western categories of today, which like I can reject every aspect of Jewish religion. I am still a Jew and I'm just as Jewish as anyone else. It's like, okay, so we're not just a religion. To say that Jews are a race or an ethnicity, I mean, look at us. Right? We are all the races and ethnicities. So not that. We're what the Ammonites and Hittites and Edomites are, which like I don't know, tribe, nation, civilization, lots of things you can call, but like most of all,
People.
we're a
Right.
family. And I love what Amos Oz and Fania Al Salzberger said in their book Jews with Words, where they said like ours is not a bloodline but a text line. And like the thing I love about that is that I don't care how you practice, I don't care what kind of Jew you are. Like these texts are ours, right? They're all of ours. We can all return to them, however, from whatever direction we want. Like they're our shared lineage, right? And I know we disagree on so many things and this and that, but like those are ours. Those are the DNA that holds us together. And so I find that very powerful. And I just think that category error that we made in the 1800s, where we said, "Oh no, we're not a people or a nation. We're religion. We just go, we're just like you. We go to a different church." It kind of breaks my heart today, because what I see it fueling is this idea among some Jews in America who are like, Judaism is a religion. And I look at those 7 million people in Israel, and they don't seem to be practicing my religion, which is focused on social justice and certain values. So forget them, right? It would be like if you said to a very progressive mainline Protestant in Berkeley, California, you have to care about a Pentecostal in Brazil because you're both Christians. I think she would say to you, like, that's not true, actually. And the problem is like those folks and those people in Israel, they're not my co-religionists, they're my siblings. And I think that gives me a different relationship with them, which I think is kind of important. And something, a good friend of mine who's a spiritual leader at a synagogue, and she had this wonderful story that she told about how someone emailed her and said, I'm an anti-Zionist Jew. Am I welcome in your congregation? And she wrote back and she says, I want to be very clear. Every Jew is welcome in my congregation. There is no litmus test. We do not care about your ideology. We don't do ideology here. What we do here is solidarity and family. So, I want you to know we do say the prayer for the hostages. We do say the prayer for our soldiers. We do sing Hatikva out of solidarity with our siblings in Israel. Whatever ideology you have about Israel is welcome here. That's not what we're talking about, but we do solidarity and we do family. And I really love that. And I feel like that category of family, because it doesn't exist in kind of the Western, in a certain like modern, world, it's often degraded as chauvinism, but I don't think it should be.
Mm. I appreciate it also, like when you talk in the book about the challenges of that Jewish encounter with modernity and that compartmentalization of Jewish experience. You acknowledge that the reformers who created that liberal form of Judaism are also what makes it possible for you, and I would include myself in this, and for me to be
Totally.
Jewish.
I'd
And
say
yet there's also like a real loss and like fit problem there, and that both can be true.
yes, both can be true. And like, this is like, that's why I'm so grateful to them. Like, I don't think I'd be a Jew today if they hadn't come up with this way. And then frankly, if it were the 1800s and my choices were the shtetl or the baptismal font or nothing, I'm going with the baptismal font or nothing, right? Like I really, I'm so grateful to our ancestors. And I would also point out that like Orthodoxy too was a reaction to modernity, right? Orthodoxy
Sure.
was a modern invention in reaction to reform. So this is, like all of our modern denominations are kind of, reactions to persecution and an attempt to kind of redo Judaism in the modern world. So I think like, I don't want to, and they've all worked beautifully. Like, right, they've all for 250 years sustained the Jewish people. And now I think people are beginning to rethink them a little bit, right? There's sort of like more of a questioning, more of a fluidity. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how this develops in the coming decades.
Right. And when you think about, like you said earlier, like, oh, well, we're sort of more like the Hittites and Edomites, it's like, well, of course, the difference is like we're still here. And I would say part of the reason why is because we have been able to continue to innovate and change and respond to, new circumstances. And
I
that
also,
has made all the difference.
yeah, and I also want to say, I'm speaking very specifically of the majority of American Jews because we tend, American Jews majority are who have roots in Europe. But let's be very clear, like there are Jews whose roots are in Africa and Asia, and they didn't go through this emancipation. They didn't go through these denominations. There was a very different approach to Judaism, one that I actually really love, where it's more of it's a traditionalism, it's a respect, but it's a different kind of relationship to halacha. I think it's very cool. Like it wasn't sort of touched by this modern trend, it didn't go through the same modern transition, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want the Ashken normativity can be a little grating, and so I want to make sure I
For
acknowledge that.
sure. No, that is really important. And also, those traditions, even if they've stuck with more of the biblical frameworks, also changed in response to their own
Oh,
setting.
of
So,
course, we were
there's,
very influenced by the people around them, just as we were in Europe. This is not hermetically sealed, right? Jews have always been influenced by folks around them.
yeah, for sure. Um, so, it was very interesting to me reading your book. My story is very different from yours. Like you write about not having the right keys to Judaism, and I was very lucky that I did have those. I was given those keys in my childhood. But I resonated with a lot of what you were exploring and trying to understand what is the role of anti-Semitism in sort of shaping our experience of Judaism. And I would say for me, an underlying aspect of my work for many years, and my work is about, as I said at the beginning, like transforming and expanding the Jewish story. So much of my work was based on the assumption that the focus on anti-Semitism as a primary shaping story of Jewish life was an old story,
Mm,
and that I was working to help create a new story. I still feel like I'm working to create a new story. And I think it's really important for us to create a new story. And I also feel like I might have been kind of wrong that it was an old story.
mm, yeah,
Um, and so that's something like I'm really grappling with that larger question of like, what is the place of anti-Semitism in the Jewish story? How much space do we give it?
yeah.
Um, how does it, you know, yeah, that
I
well said.
really, I mean, I just like I so feel you because I think, it's so present for so many of us right now that like naturally it's just naturally we're gonna talk about it and focus our attention on it. Right? It's so present and it's so scary and it's so real. I don't maybe for some people it isn't, but I think for a lot of us, including me, it is. And I think there can be this instinct to think that like, okay, it's our job to fight anti-Semitism. We have to do this. It's on us. Like it's up to us. And there's also like an instinct to self-blame that really breaks my heart, where it's like, you know what? We're just not being we don't have a good enough PR. We don't have the right tweet. It's because of those people in Israel. Like we're doing this, like we're bringing this on ourselves. And it's like, okay, wait, this has a, this is like a thousands-year-old neural groove that has been worn into the Western world psyche. We didn't create this. And there are 16 million of us with an M. Okay. We're like a neighborhood of Shanghai. There are billions of people who don't love Jews around the world. And so the idea that like somehow it is our responsibility to convince billions of people to love Jews when they have been taught to hate them for thousands of years, like that's, it just like breaks my heart when Jews put that on them, like put that on themselves and blame themselves and we're bad. It's like, that's actually not our, that's not our mission in the world to make haters love us. Right. I think our mission in the world is to create a society that's the exact opposite of ancient Egypt. Right. Like that's the mission that we are, I think, given in the Torah, right? Where we are told like, hey, actually, in the image, right? Every single human being is in the image of God. Not every single Jew, every single human being. That's like we're going to create a society where we don't worship pharaohs and emperors, but where we actually are concerned with the widow and the orphan and the poor and the stranger. Like that's kind of our mission in the world. The mission we were given was not like, hey, go convince haters not to hate you. Um, and so I think like, and I really appreciate everyone who is working to fight anti-Semitism. I want us to do that work, and I do think there's important work that can be done there. And I don't want us to lose sight of the like critically important work of being proud, passionate, committed like connected Jews, whatever that looks like for you. There's no one right way to be a Jew. I'm so tired of that narrative. There are gazillions of ways to be a Jew. But I will say that one way that I don't, the only one way I think that's not a good way to be a Jew is to be contentless, right? I think like that identity, which was my identity for 36 years. So I'm talking about myself here, the kind of like, haha, my Judaism is an ethnic joke, haha, Jewish mother joke. Like it was really demeaning. And, you know, I think that like my Jewish identity was sort of this big empty void with a lot of ethnic jokes rattling around in it. And I think when your identity is like mine, it's filled with what's ever around you. And when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, what was around me was like nothing too bad, right? I know other Jews have had different experiences, but it was like, okay, so no one was really telling stories about Jews. So I didn't, but today what surrounds so many Jews, especially young Jews, is anti-Semitism. And that void is being filled. And I think that if you don't know the Jewish story or a Jewish story, you will believe what other people tell you. So when someone says to you, you know, Jewish religion is violent and vengeful with an angry Old Testament God, and you don't know anything about Jewish tradition, ritual, spirituality, like what will you say to them? Like bagels? Or if they say, you know, Israel is a genocidal state and it's illegitimate and should be dissolved, and you don't know Jewish history or Israel, like, are you going to just say, like, I love Seinfeld? Right? Like, these are not great answers. And if you have no positive content, you'll just, that negative content will rush in. So I think that, like, not, I mean, I just think we should be proud content filled Jews because that's awesome. And that's, you know, that's a beautiful thing. And also, if your focus is fighting anti Semitism, you should know you can't fight anti Semitism if you don't know what you're fighting for. So I think that's really what I'm looking for. But I really identify with the struggle because there's such a preoccupation with this thing that is like in our face, of course. But I think the way to deal with that is to just fill ourselves up with our tradition and our heritage and our community and share it with others who want to learn and be part of it. That's my take.
Yeah. I mean, I totally hear you and agree. Like, I mean, I feel like we get this question sometimes at JWA, like, what are you doing to fight anti-Semitism? And I'm like, actually, everything about our work
Yeah.
is I mean, I would never have framed it this way probably a few years ago, but like when you know a very rich and diverse set of Jewish stories that are the kind of fullness of our history, that necessarily combats stereotypes about Jews because the stereotypes are these very narrow pieces of the story. And we're saying, like, look in our archive, there are tens of thousands of stories, most of which are not things you've ever heard or ever associated with Jewish history. And so if you have that expansiveness, that pushes out some of the other assumptions that people have.
I'll also say, just practically speaking, like, I don't think I can convince billions of people not to hate me. But I do think, I really believe that we can reach all 16 million Jews in the world and give them access to our tradition, give them community and resources and ritual and like really, and help them connect however they want to connect. Like, I believe that's attainable. I really do. That's why I write my books. So that to me is like, okay, that's a goal I can attain. I don't know about the billions of haters. I'm not sure what I can do to totally solve that problem.
Well, one of the interesting things that you write about is sort of like how you used to have this sense of anti-Semitism as kind of this like mysterious eternal force. And I think this is a really tricky thing about anti-Semitism because on the one hand, as you just said, like it has existed for thousands of years. It is like deeply embedded in pretty much every aspect of all cultures, right?
Oh.
And at the same time, so like we need to recognize that kind of enormity and intractability of it, and yet at the same time, not sort of naturalize it as like it's just something that exists like gravity, and there's nothing that we can do
Uh,
about it. It's just going to be a force. Um,
that's, I think we have like, you know, what worries me is I think we tend to talk about it like, oh, it's this darkness at in the human heart. It's like, it's a darkness. It's a mystical thing. It's like, oh, you know, the Holocaust was caused by the darkness of the human heart. And it's like, actually, that's not what caused the Holocaust. Like 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism is what led to the Holocaust, says renowned Christian scholars who I quote extensively in my book.
right.
Right? We know where this began. We know how it unfolded. We know how it made its way into the Muslim world. We know how Soviets embraced it. Like, this is the thing. This has a very clear historical lineage that you can, I mean, again, people have studied this and I'm just quoting their like brilliant work. And so I think it is important for us to understand that this neural groove as Jews have, you know, that frames Jews as being diabolically powerful, so powerful. They're like, you can't, you know, they're this like terrifying force you have to defend yourself against, totally depraved, like perverse, disgusting, dangerous. and in a conspiracy to harm you. So there aren't many of them, but they conspire behind the scenes. Power, depravity, conspiracy. It's like these powerful Jews, these small number of Jews conspired together powerfully to depravedly kill Jesus, right? That is sort of the origin of this, and it makes its way, through the world. And like, I think we need to understand that. Like, I think we actually need to understand that history so that we can just not be terrified by this, right? If you think it's a mystical darkness of the human heart force, then like, how do you understand it? You're just helpless. But when you actually say, okay, this has a lineage, I can see how this is unfolded. These are the ideas that fuel it. Okay. I can speak to those ideas and say, no, that's not true.
Right. And I think at the same time, one of the big challenges is, as you said, like power, Jewish power is one of the kinds of, you know, elements of anti-Semitism. And Jewish power is something we actually have to grapple with, right? Like Jews do have power in some ways disproportionate to our numbers, which is in part due to survival and resilience skills that we have developed over centuries of discrimination and oppression. It's in part due to positions that we were put in specifically so that we would be in a kind of scapegoat middleman role, which was not designed to be, which often has not been to our benefit, but has elements that have benefited us in the short run sometimes. And of course, now we also have a powerful Jewish state and military that does, at times, at least in my opinion, use its power in ways that don't align with Jewish ideals. So there is some way in which, like, Jewish power is something that we have to figure out how to talk about in a way that does not, but it's scary to talk about because it feels like there's always that fear of, like, is this going to somehow affirm something for anti-Semites, or how do we actually grapple with this in a
So
real way?
I guess I would just gently push back on the idea that Jews have power in America. I think we have tremendous status. I think we have, we've certainly achieved like tremendous professional and cultural achievement. We certainly have achieved, wealth and like professional success. But I don't necessarily know, we're 2% of the population. So if the majority turned against us, I'm not totally sure what we would do, right? Like I'm just thinking about like power in very kind of practical ways. We definitely have power in Israel, like as a state, right? But I don't necessarily think Israel is like the most powerful state in the world or all powerful. I think it's often kind of deemed the source of all the world's problems, and kind of, whereas like this is a state the size of New Jersey. It's not.
Right.
I know we think it's very important. I certainly think it's important in the scheme of the world's thing. Like I would probably focus more on like China, Russia, Iran. I think the obsession with Israel it's sort of, it's a reflection of very old historical ideas about Jews. But I think you know, I certainly think you're right. Like what you're alluding to with like, there is this trend in history to say there is this disgusting thing, and Jews, you have to do this disgusting thing because you can't do anything else. We're not going to let you do anything else. You're going to do this disgusting thing. And then when you do it, we're going to call you disgusting. So, okay, you can't, centuries ago, Jews were not allowed to be in guilds. They were barred from many professions, but they were allowed to do money lending, which was considered disgusting. And so they did. And people said you were disgusting money lenders. And they developed skills in finance. And so they became quite accomplished in finance and banking. And we were kind of said like, oh, you guys are disproportionate in finance and banking, right? Because you
Right.
made us, right? Decades ago in America, Jews were pushed out of the more kind of classy art forms of like theater and publishing, and told, you guys, there's vaudeville, which is kind of like, crass down market. Like that's the only thing Jews can do. So they're like, okay, I guess we'll do that. And it's like, oh, you're disgusting. But then they developed into Hollywood. And suddenly it's like Jews control Hollywood, right? Because like you made us do that. I don't, it's like there is something to it that's a little bit cruel. This idea that like you've succeeded in this thing that we forced you into, and now we are going to condemn you for that. And that I just feel like, yikes.
For
But
sure.
look, we are not a powerless people, right? We have power in Israel. We have nuclear weapons and an army. And I think that, I often see this kind of desire of anti-Zionists to not have to wrestle with the complexity that comes with power. There's an innocence when you are just the blameless, helpless victim. I get it, right? Like that is in a world where like oppressor is the bad category and oppressed is good, when powerful is bad and powerless is good. I get the instinct to say, I want to get into the powerless category. That's the good, innocent, pure category. And I think many Jews are very uncomfortable with Israel having power. I think that's just uncomfortable because with power comes responsibility and accountability and the ability to do harm. And countries are awful. Countries are awful. They are conceived in violence, they are maintained in violence, and they do terrible things. I would very much put our own country in that category. And, as an American, I accept that responsibility and power. And I think we have to work real hard to change how we're using it, especially today. And I think in Israel as well. Like I'm very critical of both current governments in America and Israel, very, as someone who loves these places and who cares deeply. Just as I'm a patriotic American who happens to disagree strongly with our current president, I'm also a proud Zionist who happens to disagree very, very, very strongly with the current Israeli government on many issues. I can hold both of those things, and it's complicated, right? It's much easier to kind of just hold your one truth and scream that everyone else who doesn't agree with you is evil. But I think if you really engage deeply with Jewish tradition, what you find is that it's a constant exercise of managing polarities, of holding opposing truths. And it's hard, right? You know, our Torah tells us love the stranger, love the non-Jew, the non-Israelite. You welcome that person. They are important. It also tells us remember Amalek, remember the enemy tribe that attacked you. Some strangers want to kill you. Love the stranger, but some strangers want to hurt you. Be open-hearted and compassionate, but don't be naive. I just see a lot of folks clinging to one of those poles and dehumanizing people on the other. And I don't think that's very Jewish. I think what's Jewish is to hold them both and wrestle with them.
Yeah. Um, yeah, this isn't a time that's, this is one of the ways in which I think Judaism is sort of countercultural to our times. And on the one hand, we spoke earlier about compassion. I have compassion. I feel sometimes in myself that sense of like, I wish it could be simpler.
Mm,
I wish
same.
I wish things were a little more clear cut. I wish we didn't have to hold so much complexity. It would
Yes,
be easier. And yet, that is not the nature of the world or of Judaism or certainly of our politics, um,
I know. And I
these
think,
days.
I was talking to some really brilliant, amazing college students at Hillel recently, and we were just talking about the kind of many layers where it's like you want a villain and you want a hero. That's what you want. But then when you actually look into the complexity of any modern issue, it's like, okay, this fact makes me think this person's a villain. Then you're like, oh, wait a second. And this fact makes me think they're kind of a hero. And this fact, villain. And suddenly there's no hero or villain. There's just a lot of messiness. And I think that's sometimes there are heroes and villains. There are extreme cases, but I think a lot of times what we're operating with is this very hard and painful gray space. And I think the people who are really wrestling tend to be the least certain and the most humble and the least dogmatic, right? They're the ones who speak in nuance, and they often aren't great with bumper stickers. It's a messier, harder place to be. And I really wrestled with that in my book. I wrestled, and my acknowledgement section has 80 people because I showed 80 people part or all of this book. And it was very important to me that they be people on both sides of the political spectrum and in the middle, on people with very different views on Israel. So I got a lot of pretty fierce pushback to what I wrote from both sides, the middle, and that was great. It made me more empathetic. It made me more careful and nuanced. And I'm sure I failed in some places. I know there are things that I could have done better, but I think just that real pushback and that, like, hey, Sarah, you say this, but you're missing this point, or actually that was pretty insensitive. Could you please, that really helped me.
Yeah. And I think it's also like we all want to be on the right side of history,
Yeah.
and we can't always, there isn't like necessarily a right side, or at least if there is, it's not always obvious in the moment.
Yeah.
And it does take a lot of humility to kind of be able to recognize that we are not going to be able to, if we think we know what the right side is, we are probably
Yeah.
not seeing the whole picture.
Yes.
Um, One of the things that you write about that was really interesting to me is you say at one point there is no such thing as a Jew outside of history, and you
Mm,
use the phrase a couple times about sort of returning Jews to history. Can
yeah.
you say a little bit more about what that means to you?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think what I meant by that was I think growing up in America, I thought that my Jewish, I thought that my safety, my identity as American was unconditional, that there was just
Mhm.
like, it was unshakable. Like I was growing up in safety. We were done with all of that stuff in history where Jews were always kind of conditionally in a place, right? Until someone kicked them out, until someone stripped them of their citizenship. I kind of just thought like, oh, that's done, right? Like I am unconditionally an American. That can't change. And I think maybe, I think that's still true, but I think just recent years I've begun to think like, oh wait, I'm unconditionally a Jew. No one can take that away from me. But actually, like all those other Jews in history, it's possible that my Americanness could be conditional, right? It's possible. I'm beginning to see that. And I think there were a lot of us who were naive, I mean, someone's in the comments saying, boy, were you naive? Yeah, I think I was a little naive. And like, you know, I think it was a real privilege to be that naive. And I think, I have compassion for myself back then because I was growing up in such safety and I didn't see, whereas like today, I think when I see that kind of naivete and I see some privilege in the kind of like, in anti-Zionism, I see a lot of privilege where it's like, I'm safe. So every other Jew in the world can just kind of be fine. And it's like, and maybe, and I'm glad that person is safe. I'm glad, but like, I have a big family. It's like 16 million people. And I'm really worried about those who aren't safe. And there are a lot of us. And I think just knowing history and seeing how often Jews were unsafe before 1948 and how often they were unsafe afterwards, but weren't slaughtered because they had somewhere to go. Um, that sobers me.
Yeah, and I think, the Jewish piece of American Jewish history is not totally separate from the tendency towards American exceptionalism of being like
Yeah,
America is its own thing and,
totally.
totally different and better and, we've that's been challenged in many different ways and I think the Jewish story is one of the places where that's being challenged too. But I think it also raises, I think the whole question of sort of like how do we see that bigger piece of history gets back to that question about like the inevitability, that how do we acknowledge that and see that bigger picture and not take ourselves outside of it and see ourselves as kind of like
Right,
in some special category and also not see anti-Semitism as sort of inevitable or eternal. And
right.
I ask
And
that question not because I think like
yeah,
there's an like because I don't have the answer to
no. And also I think it's also to not see that America has been exceptional in many ways. To just say, oh, America is like everywhere else. No, it's not. Like it has actually been exceptional in many ways. And we're also, I think, realizing in some ways it's been unexceptional. I think Pamela Nadell has written a pretty brilliant book about how anti-Semitism is not foreign to America, right? So I think again, it's holding both of those truths, right? There is an exceptionality and an unexceptionality, and we have to kind of discern where both of those things are true. And so that's the struggle. But I think those of us, those who thought, oh, it's totally exceptional, we are totally outside of history, that was clinging to that one pole. And I think, we've learned better now.
that. Yeah, and for those who haven't seen Pamela's book, I actually happen to have it sitting right here next to
Oh,
Sarah's book,
she is,
Anti-Semitism and American Tradition,
yes,
which
read it.
also just came out, and actually will.
She is a brilliant, brilliant historian. And she also, in 2019, her book came out at the same time as mine in 2019. It was about Jewish women in America and in history. And it's just wonderful. I
Yeah,
am a big fan of
she's a
hers.
great scholar. Um, so one of the questions that I think also is kind of baked into this conversation about anti-Semitism is like, how do we parse what is the role of generational trauma in all of this? And you
Mm,
have this great passage in your book where you ask that question very explicitly. Like, is it that, knowing about Jewish history makes it impossible for me to think clearly about the present, or does knowing about Jewish history mean that I like really clearly see the present and that is why it's really stressful?
yes, those are the two poles, right? Like right there. I mean, I think it's like I'm wrestling with both of those, right? Where it's like, okay, I spent 2 years deep in the darkest parts of Jewish history. Okay, am I seeing through a very narrow lens that just sort of imposes that, takes that as a lens and jams it into everything? Am I doing that? And is that making me distressed? Or like, is that actually a clarifying lens? Is that actually like a corrective lens where it's like, okay, this is happening again? And of course, the answer is both, right? The answer is both. And so I think like, there are moments when I feel like Herzl in Paris, right? Where
Mhm.
I feel like, this is Theodore Herzl, a very early leading Zionist, where he was the scholarship and the history around this is a little, it's a little, just don't take this too, it's a little bit mythical, but it's got some truth to it, where he's, a young journalist covering the trial of Alfred Dreyfus, who's a high-ranking French army officer who was accused falsely of treason, and he's just watching France just turn against Dreyfus, just turn. It's like it almost felt very suddenly, and he's just watching this and he's thinking like, oh my god, I don't think, like, I don't think I can change this. Like there's a moment of like, oh no, I don't think this we can turn this ship around. Like he did not start a PR campaign to convince people not to hate Jews. He said like, we better found a state. And that's not what I'm saying that I am now, but I do, I sometimes have these like intimations of that. And then I was reminded by my brilliant friend Dara Horn in an event we did together last night. She said, like, Sarah, people didn't just in America didn't just randomly stop hating Jews in the 1940s and 1950s. That didn't just randomly happen. Jews worked for that. They organized, they changed laws, they shared their culture. Rabbis were writing articles in Life magazines. Like she said, like, so those are the kind of two poles where it's like you can wonder, okay, am I Herzl in Paris, or am I an American Jew in the 1940s with a really strong, thriving Jewish community and the ability to make changes, to change law, to change the culture? And I think those are the two poles I'm kind of wrestling with. And yes, Dara Horn's book is fantastic. If you have not read People Love Dead Jews, please, please do yourself a favor and purchase it right now. She's absolutely brilliant.
And we did a podcast interview with her as well, which maybe my
Mm,
colleague will put into the chat. I didn't include it in the
please
list of
do.
things to
She's
mention at the end, but we can add that. Um, so you write at some point in the book, sort of towards the end, about wanting to be an unowned Jew who has
mm,
what you call a free relationship with the past. What does that mean, and what does it take to create that?
yeah, it comes from a Jewish text that said that like the Israelites needed to be hefker, which means like unowned, like to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. I thought that was so fascinating. It's like they couldn't be owned by the Egyptians. They couldn't be property. They couldn't be enslaved if they wanted to be in a state to receive Torah. They had to be free. Right? They had to kind of really be free from this kind of oppressive kind of mindset. And I think that, when I think about that, it's like, how do I make myself an unowned Jew? Like I have this fantasy that we could go back, 200 years to 1800s in Western Europe and say, okay, this kind of Judaism where we live in very insular communities that's kind of pre-modern, like, look, this needs to be updated as it always does. And so, okay, let's actually just with like no anti-Semitism, no anti-Judaism in our minds, unowned by any of the people around us who hate us. Let's look at our traditions and just with curiosity and awe and reverence and gratitude for our ancestors, and let's mine our tradition for what still works today, right? And when something doesn't work today, let's think like, how might we re-understand this, reimagine this? How might we bring this with us, but maybe in a little bit of a different way? And just to do that with an open heart, like what would we have created if we'd had the privilege to do that, which we did not, to be clear. And so when I think about that today, it's like, how can I be an unowned Jew? How can I look at my texts, my ancestors, my tradition, not with judgment, not with, oh, that's offensive, or they were wrong, or they were stupid, but like real empathy and compassion, and saying like, okay, why did they do this? Oh, I see. They were persecuted and they were afraid and they did this thing that I find distasteful, but I see what they were doing. They were trying to stay alive. Okay, compassion. Or like they had these really weird ideas about science. Okay, leeches, not going to take it with me, but like, oh, that was the technology of their day.
Right.
Okay, I can respect that. I think looking at our tradition with that kind of open heart and curiosity and love and compassion, and realizing like some things should not come with us, right? Like some things are to be left behind, but there's much to be embraced. I think that's what I mean by being an unknown Jew.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. It's hard. I was thinking a lot about that and that sense of like free relationship with the past, and thinking about like as someone whose work is history and
Yeah.
wanting to be in relationship with history, but also not, you know, not have it be something that exists as this like baggage, but something that does inform us. It was reminded me of something else that you mention in the book. Um, I don't know if this is relevant at all to how you were thinking about this, but for some reason it was connected in my mind, which is You were talking about, it was in the part where you were talking about sort of the history of Zionism, and you were talking about um, Zionists in British Mandate Palestine who were trying to figure out what their relationship with the British was going to be during World War II. And because they were both fighting with the British as part of the Allied forces during World War II and also fighting against the British who were trying to limit, refugees coming into the land. And so they said, like, we're going to fight the British as if there's with the British as if there's no, we're going to fight the war as if there's no white paper, which was the policy that was limiting Jewish immigration into Palestine. And we're going to fight the British as if there were no wars. And like, sort of like, how do you, and on the one hand, we were talking about like not wanting to compartmentalize, which I think is really important for Jewishness. Like, in my understanding of Jewish practice, like part of what's beautiful about it is that it infuses every part of your life. It's part of
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
just what you do in the synagogue, but how you eat and how you're in a relationship with people and how you do, political work and how, you treat your neighbors and all of those things. And that part of what got lost in putting Judaism in the religion box was that sense of like Jewishness infusing every action. And yet sometimes in order to be able to do the work that we need to do in an honest way, we can't have all of the factors like coming at us at every moment, right? Like we can't think about like what do we feel responsible about with Israel if we're afraid about like anti-Zionism, or if we're afraid about, what politics are going to mess with that. We have to kind of like sometimes have our blinders on and do one piece of the work without taking everything into account because it becomes paralyzing in some way. I don't know if I'm making any
Yeah.
sense, but
No, I love what you said before. Like you contrasted being owned with being in relationship. And I think that is so beautiful. Like when you're in a real relationship with someone, God forbid, they don't own you. God forbid, right? That the ownership, that is ugh. You're in a relationship, right? You're engaging with each other. I love that idea of like, it's funny. I once saw someone was offering a class saying, I want to teach you about Judaism so that you can change it. And I remember just thinking like, I don't know that I remember thinking like that's like saying to me, I want to introduce you to this very, very, this person who's like 110 years old and they've had the most extraordinary life. It has been wild and fascinating and they're so wise and a little weird and this and that. And so I want to introduce you to them so that you can change them. Like that just it's like no, I wanted to introduce you to them so you can be in relation to them, right? So you can learn to them, so you can learn from them, so you can challenge them, so you can like that's what I think relationship is. And when I think about history, it is that kind of it doesn't own us, right? We are not kind of blinded by it in some ways or narrowed by it, but we are in constant relationship with it. We're realizing where it's relevant, where it's not. And I think it's a very fluid, alive kind of thing. So I don't know. I like that frame of like relationship versus ownership. Maybe it's not quite right, but there's something to that.
yeah, right. Well, it feels like um it's more mutual and it's more generative or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a question related to this question of unowned from Rabbi Laura Geller in the chat. What role do legacy institutions like ADL or federations or APAC play in keeping us from being unowned Jews?
Yeah. So, I I think institutions are so important. I really, really do. And I have this like incredible privilege of traveling the country and like I speak at a lot of federation events and these are people like the people who come out are like really serious and they care a lot about contributing to the community and being in community. And I speak at JCCs and synagogues and Jewish organizations. And like, I am really in awe of these people who are the part of their Jewishness is to contribute to the community, to the vibrancy. It's being connected. And so I think that these institutions are like so incredibly important. And I think also they're going to be evolving, right? Like times are changing, they're evolving. People have different sensibilities. So I think like, I think the legacy institutions play a really important role. And I think they're going to be evolving as Jewishness evolves, as Jews evolve. But one thing I don't really love is the relentless attacks by Jews on Jews. Like I'm just getting more and more just kind of like heartbroken by that. And I just think like, guys, there are 16 million of us, like lots of people want to attack us. And when I just see Jews taking so much of their time attacking each other, I'm just not sure that's constructive. I think it might be more constructive if we spend our time focusing on here's this organization doing this great thing and I want to lift it up and build it up and I want to like shine the brightest light on it so people can see and celebrate this and copy it, rather than I'm going to trash this organization that I think is bad. Um, you know, I'm a big fan of tochacha, of like the Jewish, requirement to rebuke. Like if you see a fellow Jew doing something that you think is dangerous or wrong or bad, you do have an obligation to go to them privately, behind the scenes, and kindly, without shaming them, say, hey, my friend, like what you're doing is actually harmful. It's dangerous. It's this, like that kind of thing. I think I wish there was more of that and less of the kind of endless public critique of each other, which, by the way, everyone can see it. I would also point that out in Israel. Everyone could see the divisive, ugly polarization, and that made Israel weak and susceptible to attack. So I would like to see less of that.
And maybe this gets at another question in the chat from Joseph, who's asking about the shame in the title of your
Yeah,
book. Like, who is trying to shame us and for
yeah,
what?
yeah. So I think that is people who have persecuted us. That's. I'm not talking about Jews. I'm talking about, and I know Jews do it, but that's not what my book is about. My book is not about internal Jewish critique. It is about our persecutors who have tried to make us feel shame for who and what we are. And I want to reclaim my tradition from them. That this is their story is not my story, and I want to really discern those things. I want to really determine like what is my Jewish story. And I think every Jew is engaged in that work. And I think that work needs to involve engaging with Jewish content, right? That's there is a text line, there is a body, and it is all of ours. Nobody owns it. We all share it. And so I really want to urge like engagement with that content because it's extraordinary. It's really, really quite amazing.
Um, so one of the things that you're doing in your book is really complicating a lot of the existing narratives about Judaism, Jewish identity in Israel, both the ones that you inherited and sort of grappling with like your journey through those, but also the ones that are really framing a lot of politics today. And that's something also that really resonates with me. It's part of how I understand the work that JWA is trying to do, which is create a space for more complexity and nuance. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that's pretty it's countercultural now, and it is really, really hard in the age of social media, which is not a platform that is designed at all for complexity or nuance. You've obviously dealt with that by writing a nearly 300-page book,
Right,
but we
exactly.
can't all do that. So, do you have any tips about sort of like how do we manage and create space for holding complexity
Yeah.
in in this moment? And what are some of the kind of um,
Yeah.
ways that we can try to bolster that work?
Yeah. I mean, I wish it were the 90s again because I really like that decade, technologically, politically, like the music, like the clothes. But I do think that technology has been very helpful for us. Someone mentioned My Jewish Learning, right? That's a website. Safaria, JWA. I mean, think of like the way that what we're doing right now. This is going to allow people from all over the place to come in. And so I really celebrate the kind of technologies that allow for complexity and nuance and this kind of humanizing interaction where like I see you, you see me. If I'm going to say something cruel, I'm going to see the hurt on your face, right? Like I'm not going and that makes me want to be very careful, right? That makes me, I don't want to hurt you. Um, and we can have a really deep conversation like we're having. And it's really, and people can ask brilliant questions and like, this is great. Most social media platforms don't allow for this. They're anonymous. They're very dehumanizing. They're incredibly cruel. I was listening to Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, on a podcast, and he said something that just chilled me. He said that when young people go into an anonymous social media space where they're kind of encouraged to critique, they become monstrous. I mean, kids who are generally pretty good kids begin to just say like the cruelest, most obscene, like really awful things. And so I think that, social media is just it's a platform that is not good for us as Jews who want to hold opposing truths, who want to wrestle with polarities. So I actually think like engaging much less on social media would be good for us. I don't do social media. I do, if I want to write something, I have to go through traditional media. I get rejected a lot. It's not the most efficient process, but I'd like us to do more of that. And I'm not a parent and I am in awe of parents and I want to hug every parent because what we've done to parents is so unfair. We've said, oh, it's you figure out whether your kid should have a phone or not. You figure it out alone.
Right.
No, this is a collective action problem. If I were the principal of a Jewish day school, I would say no kid gets a smartphone until senior year. Your kid does not own a smartphone, period. I've made the decision for you, parents, because we have to help parents with this. It's terrible. I think that would really help our kids.
Um, there's a question in the chat about what people facing anti-Semitism in the workplace can learn from history and how do we hold
Mm.
organizations and institutions accountable?
I hope that question is not coming from personal experience, but I worry it might be, and I'm sorry if it is. I mean, look, there are laws that Jews, our ancestors in these Jewish organizations in the 40s and 50s put on the book, and I think that they need to be enforced. And some of the things that are happening in workplaces are hard to prove legally, right? They're insidious, they're subtle, and something I say to college students a lot, to Jewish college students, which is like, look, if there are clubs on your campus that have a no Zionist allowed policy and they are making you miserable, you don't have to be abused to work on climate change or reproductive rights. That's not okay. That's okay. You can report to the campus, do what you can do, but sometimes there's just the campus doesn't help. So I said, like, you know what you can do? Start your own climate club. Start your own reproductive rights club, not just for Jews, for anyone. You make that club the most inclusive and radically welcoming club, and you make the club awesome. Do amazing work on climate change and reproductive rights. Don't sit around hating Zionists. And this is what Jews did in America decades ago. When we were excluded from law firms, we formed our own hospitals, we formed our own universities. Like, we've done this. I don't think it's the first resort, but I think it is an important resort. And when we created these, we didn't make them Jews only. We said, like, this is open to anyone who wants to do law and is hardworking and talented and is willing to work with Jews. And you know what? I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if we do that again. I think a lot of institutions are pretty mediocre these days. They're pretty rotten and pretty unimpressive. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if Jews start their own organizations and say, hey, this is a law firm that just practices law. That's what we do here. Or this is a reproductive rights organization that does reproductive rights. Anyone is welcome to work here. We will help everyone, but we're not sitting around hating Zionists. We're doing reproductive rights. Alison Corman has done this here in DC. She was basically kicked out of the DC Reproductive Rights Organization. She founded her own Jewish repro rights organization that helps many, many people of all backgrounds access reproductive care. So I think we can do that again. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I wish we didn't have to, but not the worst thing in the world.
And I think there's also really interesting questions about like when do we have to, this isn't exactly what you're saying because you're talking about things that could be open for anyone, but I think also there's this one part where you talk about like taking refuge in a shtetl in your mind. And I
Right.
related to that because I often say like, I know I'm in a bubble and I really love my bubble sometimes. And,
Totally,
you know,
totally. And
and
that's
it,
okay.
right, like there are times when it is okay to be in a shtetl in your mind. And then there are other times when it's very dangerous for us to never get out of our
That's the
bubbles
thing.
or
And I
the
actually
shit.
think of all minority communities. I've heard this from people of all different minority communities where they're like, sometimes I just need to be with my people. I don't want to translate or explain or code switch. I just want to relax. I'm like, that's okay. I want every community to have that, right? And there are times where you need to actually be with other people. And so it's again, the polarities, right? Both of those things need to be held and attended to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for
Such
your
a pleasure.
book and for doing this important and difficult work and for this conversation. And thanks to everybody in the chat. Thanks to everyone for being with us tonight. We have a lot of we've had other conversations with Sarah before about her previous book, Here All Along, both the book talk that I mentioned from 2020 and a podcast episode. So you can discover more on JWA's site. There were also, as I always try to go through JWA's resources and like pull out other things that are relevant. I pulled a couple of essays from our site that I thought touched on some of these issues. Um, a piece by one of our Teen Rising Voices fellows about the complications of talking about Israel and the need for nuance and listening, and then another essay on our site about coming out as a Jew in progressive organizations. So folks can read those. We'll put the links in the chat, and they'll also be in the text on YouTube. When you get the recording of this tomorrow, there'll be a link to the YouTube video, and there will be text underneath that describes this event, and then also has those links if people are trying to find them. This is our last book talk in 2025, but we will be back with many more in the new year, starting on January 15th. So keep an eye out for a registration email about that. We also have a couple of events before then, including an online event by and for Jewish women of color on women's anger as a creative force. That is on Thursday, December 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, for those of you who happen to be in the Boston area, I'm sorry, I know this is exclusive to our Boston folks, but we are having an in-person event, a film screening of the documentary film Janice Ian Breaking Silence. That's on Wednesday, December 3rd at 6:30 at the Coolidge Corner Theater, followed by a conversation between the writer of the film and producer and me. So I hope that I will see many of you at many more JWA events to come. Until next time, wishing those of you in the US a happy Thanksgiving. Take care, everybody. Let's take care of each other. Good night, and thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a joy.
Good night, everybody.